Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Board for Tuesday, the 3rd of December 2024. Can I remind you that the meeting is being recorded and the recording will be made available on the Comhairle's website following the meeting. Item number 1 on this afternoon's agenda is the minute of the meeting of the 20th of November this year, and that's for your approval. Do members agree with that minute? Yep. Okay, thank you. Item number 2 is declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest they may have in any items of the agenda. It would be helpful if members explained why they are declaring an interest in the item concerned. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Okay. With regards to procedures, any motion or amendment in relation to a planning application must be based solely on planning reasons. If a member moves an amendment, the Chair will invite him or her to clearly articulate the amendment and the planning reasons upon which it is based. Thereafter, the Chair may, at his discretion, continue the business of the meeting in accordance with the time-out protocol. The Planning Manager for the Development Management Team will present the recommendation of officers. In the event of a member seeking to move an amendment, the Chair may call upon the Legal Advisor or the Planning Advisor to provide advice to the Board. Thank you for that. Moving on to item number 3 in this afternoon's agenda. This is an application to develop land at Eashkin Lochs, Isle of Lewis. This report is to determine the Comhairle's view as principal consultee in respect of an application for consent under Section 36 of the 1989 Electricity Act, following consultation on the Environmental Impact Assessment Report, submitted on the 22nd of August 2023 to the Scottish Ministers, regarding plans for Uisneach Wind Farm. The application also seeks deemed planning permission under Section 57, subsection 2 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997. This development is classed as a national development and, in accordance with a scheme of delegation, requires to be brought before the Comhairle for its decision. And can I now invite Morag Ferguson to speak to this report?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Chair, Anne Napier, my colleague, who is back in Rebecca, undertook the vast majority of assessment work on this application, and she will join me to take you through parts of this presentation. The report before members today relates to a proposed development that's classed as being of national importance on account of its potential to generate 165 megawatts of renewable energy output, and therefore make a substantial contribution to the UK and Scotland's climate change targets. This is one of the larger projects that has come before the board, and to give a sense of scale, the construction phase of the proposed wind farm is predicted to take 3 years to complete, and the development site shown on the slide there extends to 4,000 acres. The project is an environmental impact assessment application, having been assessed as an EIA development. Therefore, the volume of detailed information the developer was required to submit, and we are required to examine and address in our assessment, which ultimately forms the recommended view before you, is quite significant. Therefore, of necessity, the committee report is lengthy as it sets out the examination and assessment of each topic in the EIA. This presentation, while also lengthy, only highlights the key matters that were either significantly or modestly beneficial or significantly adverse. Consent for a wind farm development in this location was granted previously by Scottish ministers in 2010. That was the Comhairle wind farm, and then subsequently an east extension in 2011 and a southerly extension in 2015. So there were 3 consents that collectively are referred through in the committee report as the consented scheme. That development was not constructed, but each of these consents did proceed through to conditions discharge, and some minor works were commenced on each of the consents so that these permissions remain alive. The application before members is effectively a completely new design of a wind farm on largely the same site as the previous consented scheme. There are slight variations, and we'll come to that in a later slide. As the Chair said, the application under consideration is one that's been made to Scottish ministers under Section 36 of the Electricity Act for consent to build a generating station and for deemed planning permission for the development and use of the land. It will therefore be for Scottish ministers to make the ultimate decision as to whether or not to grant the deemed planning permission, but it has consulted the Planning Authority for its view on the EIA report, as it is required to do under the Electricity Works Environmental Impact Assessment Scotland Regulations of 2017. If granted permission, the responsibility for discharge of planning conditions and the obligations covered in the planning obligation and overseeing the implementation of the development in accordance with those conditions and obligations will fall to the Comhairle as the planning authority for this area. I'll pass you over to Anne now, who'll maybe take us through some of the key points.
Thank you, Morag. The committee report before members, and to which this presentation relates, is carefully structured. It brings together the views contributed by the public, the views of consultees, the planning history of the site, national and local policy context, and has set out the assessment of the environmental and planning issues. Then, having weighed up the benefits against the disadvantages of the development proposed, the report concludes with a recommendation for the view of the Comhairle for submission to Scottish ministers. This presentation will set out a summary of the details of the development proposed and the planning history of the site before looking at some key visualisations of the scheme. We'll then look at the principle of development and the issues considered within the assessment as set out in the committee report, before setting out the key benefits of the scheme, the potential significant harmful impacts, and the mitigation measures proposed. The presentation, like the report, will conclude with the recommendation of the view of the Comhairle to be submitted to Scottish ministers. The application seeks consent for the erection of up to 25 turbines on land approximately 20 kilometres southwest of Stornoway. The site is some 1,647 hectares, as Morag said earlier, about 4,000 acres in size, although the wind farm infrastructure would only occupy a small part of the overall development site, as each wind turbine needs to be separated from its neighbouring turbine to maximise performance. This slide shows the extent of the site in relation to Stornoway and the A859 Stornoway to Tarbert Road through this part of Lewis. And I think Morag is going to point out some key villages to you.
Yeah, it's maybe useful while we're on the slide, which is the only one that we have that shows the relationship of the wind farm site to Stornoway. You'll see the road that's coming out towards the wind farm is the Ishkin Road, and that road, highlighted in red, will be upgraded to 5 metres in width. It is a non-classified road, but it is adopted for maintenance by the Comhairle. It's a very narrow road at the moment, probably between 5 and 3 metres wide at its maximum. It's also a single track with passing places. So that road will be upgraded as part of the scheme. The Stornoway is, you can see in the far north of the top of the slide there. And as you come south along the road from Stornoway heading towards Tarbert, the road just in the first, just if you come down a wee bit, Fiona, to Lurapost. So there is Lurapost is in North Lochs, but most of the houses there face south. So we have a viewpoint from Lurapost looking towards the wind farm because a visualisation was carried out there for daytime and nighttime. And then if you come back down and come along the South Lochs Road, So if you come all the way along and then out through, then at the very, at the sea loch down yet, Fiona, you've got Graver and Lemmerway. And to the west of Lemmerway, there is Eilean. We have viewpoints from these viewpoints as well. So we'll come to those later in the presentation. I'll just hand back to you, Anne.
Thank you. This next slide shows the application site in a little more detail, including the position of the proposed turbines within the main part of the application site and the access to the site from the main A859 road along the unclassified but adopted Ishkin Road. The extent of the application site was enlarged as part of the application process to provide additional land within the site for peat restoration, which is shown in green, wet heath restoration, which is in purple, and a second substation compound, which is the small area with marked in red. This slide shows the extent of the development proposed within the application site. The proposed turbine locations are marked in blue for the 22 turbines that would be up to be 200 metres in height, and green for the 3 turbines that would be 180 metres in height. The proposed permanent Met masts are located within the turbine layout and are marked with a black triangle. The 2 proposed substations are close to the Ishkin Road and are marked in red. The existing public road, the Ishkin Road, within the site boundary is shown in black and, as Morag has said, is proposed to be upgraded. The access tracks to serve the turbines are shown in brown, with the floating access tracks shown in green. The temporary construction compounds are shown in orange, with the proposed borrow pits shown with a purple crosshatch. This next slide shows the layout of the previously consented Moyerville wind farm and its east extension, which is outlined in green, and the south extension outlined in brown. As Morag was saying, these 3 Section 36 consents are jointly referred to as the consented scheme in both the committee report and this presentation. The wind farm previously consented is in broadly the same area as the development that's now proposed. The main difference is that the consented scheme extends further to the south and west and proposes up to 45 turbines rather than up to 25. And this next slide provides a side-by-side comparison of the 2 layouts, with the consented scheme to the left and the proposed development layout of the current application to the right. The comparison demonstrates clearly that the turbines in the current proposal would be more clustered than the consented scheme. Excuse me. It would also see the emission of the turbines high up on the ridge to the west, and those in the extreme southwest of the consented scheme, which will become evident when we look at the visualisations. The public road, which is shown in black, would pass through the proposed wind farm, with 4 of the proposed turbines located to the east of the township road and the remainder to the west. This slide shows an extract of the Ishkin Road improvement where a replacement bridge is proposed on a new alignment, which is shown in purple, just to the east of the existing Ishkin Road, Seaforth River crossing. And this slide shows the layout of the proposed development, which would consist of up to 25 3-bladed horizontal wind turbines and would have a total installed capacity of approximately 165 megawatts and produce an average of approximately 578,160 megawatt hours of electricity annually, based on a site-derived capacity factor of 40%. And this would equate to the power consumed by approximately 164,764 average UK households. The proposed development is estimated to become carbon neutral in approximately 1.3 years. The previously consented scheme was for 45 shorter turbines. Of those, 33 would have been up to 145 metres, 11 up to 150 metres, and 1 up to 130 metres. The current application proposes 2 heights of turbine. 22 turbines would be 200 metres to tip height, and 3 turbines would be 180 metres to tip height. The turbine indicated on this slide is a typical example, with the model as yet to be finalised. If members are minded to support the proposal, the overall height and colour of the turbines is recommended to be controlled by condition. As well as the turbines themselves, a significant amount of associated development and infrastructure would be required to support the proposal. Two substation compounds are proposed, each of which would have a control building. And the slide shows an indicative elevation, the final details of which are again proposed to be controlled by condition. The proposed development also includes 2 permanent Met masts, which would be up to 122.5 metres in height, which is indicated on this slide. I'll now hand you back to Morag, who'll take you through some of the key visualisations of the scheme.
Thank you, Anne. This slide is a zone of theoretical visibility that shows where the turbines are theoretically visible from, excluding buildings and things like trees or other obstructions. So it assumes a bare earth model. So the areas where the consented scheme would be visible are marked in yellow. The areas where the proposed development would be visible are marked in green, and the areas where both the consented and the proposed scheme would be visible are marked in blue. So overall, certainly from viewpoints on land, there would be no major additional visibility. One of the major significant effects of any large-scale wind farm is that landscape and visual impacts will almost invariably arise. In this case, they are assessed as significant after mitigations are applied and are therefore a key matter that are assessed through the EIA. The views that we'll show in the presentation are just a sample of those assessed. They've been selected to represent the most likely visual impact from important locations around the site, as well as views from some of the local road network. This slide shows the location of all the viewpoints that were assessed. Each is marked by a number circled with a dot. So this first visualization is one that is taken to the east of the site on the road from Graver to Lemreway. It's B8060. And the image is taken facing west. So you're looking through the wind farm. The ridge of Farosheval is the long ridge to the right, Benvianach in the middle, and Moyeval is the hill in the background further to the left. At the top is the proposed development, which is the subject of this application under consideration today. At the top is the layout, distribution and height of the formerly consented development. And the key design improvement here is the omission of the 5 turbines that sat high on the ridge and were visible above the ridge of Farosheval. This next visualization is taken from the top of the summit of Benvor. Benvor lies approximately 4 kilometres to the southwest of the nearest turbines in the proposed wind farm. The summit of Benvor is 572 metres, or just shy of 1,900 feet. And in this view, you're looking northeast through the wind farm, over the moors of South Lochs towards the Minch in the distance, and you're seeing along the inner reaches of the Loch Shalach Sea Loch. In this image, the what's clear is that the omission of the 3 turbines from the former southwest extension, you can see them in the bottom of the slide at the bottom here, these 3 have been omitted. And that represents a design improvement. This next visualization is taken on the Lurabust Village Road. It's just after you come out of the North Loss Community Association Hall, and if you're travelling west on the road, it's just about 100 metres along the road, and it's taken facing south. So this viewpoint was used as one to illustrate both the daytime and the nighttime impacts, as aviation lighting will be visible on a select number of turbines on a clear night. To the naked eye, the wind farm will be in the distance, but nevertheless, there will be a change in view from the village, where most houses have their quay frontage looking south. However, it's concluded that there won't be much difference in the effects between the formerly consented development when you compare it with the now proposed development. This next visualisation is taken from the top of the Cleasham in Harris. It's the highest summit in the Outer Hebrides at 2,600 feet. It's a popular hill walking route, and there are a range of other hill ridges visible from it. For those of you less familiar, the Cleasham is the hill that sits immediately behind the Monaghan wind farm if you're travelling north from Tarbert towards Stornoway. Here again, you're looking northeast across various hill ridges on the moors, and you can see the branches of Loch Seaforth in the centre of the visualisation there. The high hill in view is Spinvore, the highest of the hills in view is Spinvore that we saw, from which an earlier visualisation was shown. Again, from this view, the turbines of the wind farm are running along the ridge, but the difference between the consented and proposed developments is fairly marginal. As covered in the report, the Callanish Schedule Monument lies to the northwest of the proposed wind farm. Callanish, as you will be aware, is of international importance, and it's imperative that any scheduled monument and its setting is protected from inappropriate development. In this case, the monument is at a distance, but it has a relationship with the surrounding landscape. This proposed development, on account of the increased height, will mean that more of the turbine tips are visible on the skyline. But while there will be more of them visible, they would appear left of the turbine tips that were visible in the former consented scheme, which you can see in the bottom slide. The main issue here is that they are slightly less intrusive in views from the stones towards the Cailleach na Monja, or Sleeping Beauty bridge, which is an important view from the Callanish stones, as it forms the major lunar standstill where the moon is said to align with the southern hills during its most northerly position in the night sky during its 18-year cycle. Final viewpoint is the Lewis Wall Memorial, and again this is shown as a wireframe. Again, it's at a distance, and this viewpoint needs no explanation. The Lewis Wall Memorial, erected in 1924 on a hilltop outside of the town of Stornoway, holds a commanding position in the landscape and is a highly important structure which is also listed. Looking south, the turbine tips will be visible in the distance, and the 3 Arnish Moor turbines and the Creed turbine are shown in blue in the foreground. The wireframe demonstrates, however, that the proposed scheme at the top will result in a slightly more compact layout of the wind farm than was the case for the consented scheme, and therefore this is positive. I'll now hand you back to Anne, who will take you through some of the key issues.
Thank you, Morag. We'll now look at the policy context for the proposal and the principle of development. As a defined national development in NPF 4, the principle of the proposed development does not need to be agreed. In terms of the spatial strategy, the location of the proposed wind farm is considered to accord with policy, subject to detailed assessment of compliance with the provisions of the supplementary guidance. In addition, the location and extent of the site is broadly comparable to that of the consented scheme. as we've seen earlier. The application itself includes a comprehensive environmental impact assessment report, which was revised by the submission of supplementary environmental evidence information, which considers potential impacts of the proposed development in relation to particular topics, as indicated on the slide. The EIA report concludes with an assessment of the significance of effects for each of these issues. The committee report for each issue considers the policy context, summarises the findings of the EIA report, and provides an assessment of the issue. This assessment draws on the responses by specialist consultees and public comments, both for and against, before reaching an overall conclusion. Generally, the conclusion of the assessment in the committee report reflects the comments of consultees. Where on occasion we've come to a different view, the justification for this is set out within the report. Given the support for such development within national and local planning policies, one of the key benefits of the proposal would be the provision of renewable energy. A total installed capacity of approximately 165 megawatts would make a meaningful contribution to meeting Scottish and UK government targets. The overall anticipated carbon payback time is 1.3 years. The potential emissions savings would be over 7 million tonnes of carbon dioxide over the lifetime of the development. Therefore, these represent clear and demonstrable benefits of the proposal that should be given significant weight in its favour. The proposal would also have a positive effect on the local economy and employment, and subject to the satisfactory provision of accommodation, would not be harmful to tourism. It would have some benefits to recreational access and has the potential to result in community wealth building, subject to securing the identified mitigation by planning conditions. While these benefits are likely to be relatively modest, given the island context, it is considered that they should also be given significant weight. In addition, peat extraction volumes and the extent of habitat loss is an improvement over the consented scheme, as is the extent of proposed habitat restoration, its future management, and the potential for biodiversity enhancement. These are matters that also weigh in its favour. The main adverse effect of the proposal would be in relation to landscape and visual impacts. There would be significant adverse effects on landscape character and the widespread significant adverse effects on views. These impacts would only affect parts of the surrounding sensitive landscape and specific views, and would not significantly affect the reasons for the designation of the South Lewis, Harris and North Uist National Scenic Area, its special qualities or its overall integrity. However, given the scale of the likely effects, it is considered that the proposal would not maintain the overall integrity of landscape character or relate positively to the specific landscape and visual characteristics of the local area. Having regard to the extent and nature of these effects, it's considered that this harm should be afforded significant weight. I can hand you back to Morag.
Main, subject to the implementation of identified mitigation measures which are set out in the report, the residual impacts of the proposed development are generally considered to weigh neither for nor against the proposal. Significant weight has been given to the harm to landscape character and visual impacts in accordance with local planning policy. However, having regard to national policy, it's concluded that this harm would be clearly outweighed by the greater significant weight given to the national benefits resulting from the delivery of renewable energy infrastructure, coupled with significant weight given to the modest socio-economic benefits and biodiversity enhancements set out above. In addition, while the proposal would cause material harm to the landscape and visual amenity, it is also considered overall that the proposed development would be less harmful than the extant consented scheme. This also lends support in favour of the proposal in terms of the planning balance. Consequently, in this case, it's concluded that the identified conflict with Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan Policy NBH1, that's to do with landscape, in this regard would be outweighed by NPF Policy 411E, which recognises that while landscape impacts are to be expected from some forms of renewable energy, impacts are localised and design mitigations have been applied. The particular benefits of the development proposed set out above would be sufficient to justify support for the proposal overall. The recommendation has been set out at paragraph 3.1 of the report and is set out here for ease of reference. The views are set out in section 15 of the committee report and summarised in the next slide. Should be recommended for submission to Scottish ministers. In addition to matters listed in Appendix 1, which I'll come to, it's also considered necessary in the planning obligation Section 75 agreement to seek agreement from the applicant to not develop further the extant consented scheme. There is a mismatch between the two, the existing site and the proposed site, and therefore technically it would be possible to implement some of the turbines that are out with the limits of the currently proposed scheme. The other recommendation is that it be delegated authority be given to the Chief Executive to engage further with the Scottish Government Energy Consents Unit and statutory consultees regarding the issues raised and, where appropriate, to engage on drafting finalised planning conditions and legal obligation. Further, should Scottish ministers be minded to approve the application, that delegated authority be given to the Chief Executive to reach agreement on the planning conditions and to complete the planning and legal obligations. There are a number of points to the Comhairle's view as principal consultee, which I've reproduced in this slide. I'll maybe just allow members to read through that first of all. And as I said at the start of the presentation, if the scheme is granted consent under Section 36 of the Electricity Act by Scottish ministers, a deemed planning permission would also be granted by them. Appendix 1 to the report includes the detailed wording of planning conditions and also refers to the need for a Section 75 planning agreement and legal obligation and sets out the various matters which would need to be covered. The recommendation is set out at section 3.1 of the report. I'm happy to take any questions. That concludes the presentation.
Well, can I thank Mrs. Ferguson and Mrs. Napier for that very extensive report, and commend you both for all your endeavours associated with it. Before I open out to questions or comments from the board, I have a question relating to paragraph 12, decimal 180 within the main body of the report, Mrs. Napier, relating to developers' concerns relating to issues associated with peatland restoration. I note within that paragraph the developer has stated that it might be difficult to find or to source areas within the local vicinity that may be suitable for peat habitat restoration. I wonder if you could elaborate on that further for members of the board.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This relates to comments that were made on the proposal initially by NatureScot. So the application was originally submitted and proposed peatland restoration of 50 hectares, and NatureScot weren't content with the amount of restoration that was being proposed. The amount that would be lost is roughly 44 hectares, and NatureScot were looking for a restoration multiplier of 1 to 10, so 10 times the amount of restoration compared to habitat loss, or peatland loss rather. In response to those initial concerns that were expressed by NatureScot, the applicants then revised the proposal as part of the supplementary environmental information and increased the amount of peatland restoration to 89 hectares, up from 50. So that's now roughly sort of twice as much being restored as would be lost. That still, however, falls far short of the amount that NatureScot were looking for initially, which was about 440 hectares. So there's quite a big difference between the two. So the information in the paragraph that you referred to, 12.180, was the applicant's response to NatureScot's concerns, which continue to be expressed, that the amount of peatland restoration would not be sufficient to meet their guidance. And the applicants have indicated that it would be difficult for them to find the amount that NatureScot were looking for, 440 hectares or thereabouts, within the application site. They've increased the amount from 50 hectares to 89, but they wouldn't be able to find the remainder within the application site. They have, however, put forward as an alternative a managed grazing proposal that would be taken forward as part of the habitat management plan, and that would cover 611 hectares, so quite a sort of substantial area. And the developer feels that the combination of the two would be sufficient. This habitat restoration would go some way to addressing those concerns. But I have to say that NatureScot continue to have reservations about what's being proposed. We have come to the view, having read the applicant's sort of justification, that would be sufficient, and we're content that that would satisfy or be sufficient to satisfy the issue on that particular case. But this is one of the situations where our views differ from that of the consultee.
Thank you for your answer, Mrs. Napier. I would like to now open it out to members of the board for any questions or comments. Councillor Macaulay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Anne and Morag, for an in-depth look at this case. Two issues, two points I would like to raise. In 3B, the whole of all these conditions that they have to abide by, rightly so, to get this project underway, it has to be policed, and I believe that has to be policed by ourselves, the council. Do we have the staff and the resources to do this, or is it going to be any help from any outside bodies? And the second part, I would say, well, I appreciate that what I'm about to say isn't maybe part of our remit here today to decide upon, but they're building a 5-meter width road to feed in the amount of concrete, etc., that has to go towards this project. And bear in mind, this is going to be a 3-year long, maybe a long 3-year amount of traffic, etc. That's going to be on our roads going to and from wherever they're coming. And I have concerns that we don't have the finance or the reserves to make sure our roads are going to be adequate for their needs and therefore for our needs. Can are my concerns founded, or are they going to be, or something going to be done about it by themselves, by the people that are doing this?
Can you assist Councillor Macaulay with those 2 points, Mrs. Ferguson?
Yeah, maybe coming to your second point first. So it is a benefit of the scheme that the developer will be required to upgrade the road from the Belmouth junction of the Ishkin Road all the way out to the wind farm. It'll be 5-meter width. At the moment, it's barely 2.5, 3 meters. It will be 5-meter width with elongated passing places, and at any point where there is like either sides of bridges or invisibility. So that will be at their cost. In addition to that, the conditions require that there is a pre-commencement survey carried out of the main roads where any kind of abnormal roads would be trafficked, and that would be covered through a traffic management plan. So during the rest of the roads are considered are, two-way, with the exception of the Arlish Road, which again is proposed to be upgraded. And therefore the assessment to date is that the road would be capable of carrying the level of traffic that's required. Obviously, there would have to be an agreement between our own roads department and the developer in relation to any damage to the roads that's occasioned by the carrying of heavy loads. If I can come to your other point on conditions, the conditions are required to mitigate the harmful effects of the scheme, and they do require to be discharged by the council itself as planning authority. Within those conditions, you'll find that the developer is required to provide certain levels of expertise. So they need to have like an archaeological clerk of works, an ecological clerk of works on the site who would report to us for the monitoring while the construction is ongoing. But the actual discharge of the conditions would fall to ourselves. And that's the case with any deemed consent that's granted by Scottish ministers.
Councillor Macaulay.
Thank you very much, Morag. It doesn't allay my fears that this is going to put a heavy burden on both the council and especially your department for such a project of this scale. With the amount of work, additional work that this department takes on, and they take on a huge amount of work, and as we all know, I have concerns that you won't have the manpower to do what may be required. With regard to the road, I quite understand that the road going into Eastern, etc. That's they're going to do that, and I suppose I'm thankful that I presume any agreement done between ourselves and the contractor would be that they would pay for any. I assume that they would pay for any upgrading of the road that required to be done or any damage that was done during the build. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. I notice Councillor Thompson online has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check my understanding before I ask my question? Has planning permission been granted for a version of this development?
Ferguson?
Yes, that's correct. There was a planning permission granted. The main planning permission was granted in 2010. An extension to that wind farm was granted in 2011, and a further extension was granted in 2015. So that was for 45 turbines at a lesser height.
Okay, so there's consent there for a wind farm. It's just the detail of the wind farm that we're talking about today. Okay, so my question is, you mentioned in the report that this development had the potential to contribute to community wealth building. And I just wondered, is there something within the delegated authority to the Chief Executive, the planning conditions, that we can improve that potential for community benefit and make it a huge community benefit rather than a small community benefit?
Mrs. Ferguson?
Okay, Councillor Thompson. So community benefit itself, i.e. as in the money that might be paid over by a developer to a community, is not a material planning consideration, and therefore we can't take that into account in the planning decision. However, other matters which we did cover that are considered to meet the community wealth building tests, while they don't meet the tests to be imposed as planning conditions or covered in a planning obligations agreement, could be covered under a separate legal agreement under the Local Government Act. So that would be a matter for others in the council to take forward. It wouldn't be for planning.
Okay, thank you for that.
You happy with that, Councillor Thompson?
I'm not happy with it, but I'm sure the answer's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
That's fine, thanks. Any other comments or questions from members of the board? Okay. Therefore, do members agree to recommend that the Comhairle agree to the 5 recommendations set out at paragraph 3.1 of this report?
Agree.
Apologies, Councillor Macaulay has just come in with a question.
Not a question. Could we put in another proposal that we get some kind of manpower compensation to our staff for the enormous amount of man hours and etc. We've obviously put into this already and going to put in the future. We all know what we're facing in the future, and I think there should be some kind of compensation or help or aid from the Scottish Government, and that should be put into this proposal.
Thank you. So Maura can obviously correct me if I'm wrong. We do obviously get planning fees. I think there are perhaps issues with the planning service getting other income in from developers to perhaps speed up the process. Maura, anything to add to that?
I think post-determination, that is a possibility, but it would be one to be discussed at a kind of departmental level with the developers rather than through the specific planning application. That's my understanding.
Okay. Mr. Macaulay?
Thanks for your indulgence. I was thinking more of the Scottish Government than the developers.
Yes, there is ongoing liaison and with Scottish Government about what's happening here in terms of renewables and how challenged the organisation is going to be in terms of being able to deliver on Scottish Government aspirations around net zero. So I think it's just that case has been made and we're continuing to make it around additional planning resource.
Thank you for that. So therefore, do members formally agree to recommend that the Comhairle agree to the recommendations, the 5 recommendations at paragraph 3.1 of this report?
Agree.
Thank you for that. With your permission, I shall call a 10-minute adjournment to allow members and officers to have a comfort break, and we'll reconvene at 3:05. Number 4. This is for an application for development of a battery energy storage facility comprising of 6 banks of battery units, associated inverters, transformers and high voltage electricity substation, siting of welfare unit and storage container for parts, create site access, aggregate hard standing car parking area, 3 metre high palisade fencing and gates and a 4 metre high acoustic barrier at Battery Point Energy Storage Park, Newton Street, Stornoway, Isle of Lewis. Now, this application is classed as a major development under the Town and Country Planning Hierarchy of Developments, Scotland Regulation 2009. The application cannot be determined under delegation, and in accordance with the scheme of delegation is referred to the Comhairle for a decision. And can I now invite Morag Ferguson to speak to this report?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So, as the Chair said, this is a planning permission for a major development. It's classed as a major development on account of the output of 25 megawatts. Planning permission sought for the battery energy storage facilities. It would be comprised of 6 banks of 24 units, 24 containerised units, arranged in a 12x2 pattern. Each containerised unit is 1.3 metres by 1.3 metres square and about 2.3 metres tall. In addition to the battery units, there would be inverters, transformers and a high voltage electricity substation. There would also be a welfare unit and a storage container for parts. There would be 2 site accesses created. The whole site would be a hard standing aggregate finish would be created. There would be a car parking area outside of the fence. Surrounding the battery units, there would be a 3 metre high palisade fencing and a 4 metre high acoustic barrier around the side that is closest to other buildings. The application was accompanied by supporting information in relation to noise, visualisations and health and safety. The slide just gives an indication of where the site is in relation to the town and harbour of Stornoway. The site is just off Newton Street as you move towards the causeway that takes you over to Goat Island, where there are a range of industrial and processing activities and the marina. In terms of the development strategy of the Hebrides Development Plan, the site is within the boundary of the main settlement of Stornoway. The land is characterised as brownfield. It's currently covered in rough grasses and there are isolated pockets of discarded marine equipment. The actual site itself is quite small, it's less than half a hectare. It's partially reclaimed ground. It sits to the south of Seaview Terrace, and as I said, it's close to the start of the causeway to Goat Island. In terms of the surroundings, there is built development, the access to Goat Island to the west, the Coast Guard station to the south, and the hard standing relating to the power station to the north and east, and there are no designations affecting the site. The slide just gives that in a bit more context, so you can see like in the bottom of the slide, the Coast Guard building here, the power station to the east, and to the north you can just see the Seaview Terrace, this group of houses, and their gardens, and then Newton Street running along the seafront. Again, like this plan submitted by the applicant shows the proposed site layout. Again, it's useful to see on here the 1 to 7 Newton Street, houses, flats here, and then the houses on Newton Street itself. So the red line boundary is the extent of the application site. To the north, there would be a new access route created off just at the start of the access over to Goat Island, and there would be a gate leading into the yard, just where the colour changes from the blue to the light blue. If you look at the banks of battery modules, each of these, as I say, is like 2 by 12, and there are 3 transformers and ring main unit at the head of each of the banks. The other thing to note is the second access, which would be created to the south, just opposite the Coast Guard station. The actual site itself, the battery modules themselves would be enclosed by an acoustic barrier, which is shown in the orange around the back of the battery banks, and around the front in the green there would be a metal palisade fence. So that would be a secure area. There would then be a mesh fence further out, enclosing the rest of the hard standing. That area would provide a turning head, shown slightly to the north of the battery banks there, and there would also be an auxiliary transformer, substation, and there would also be the spare parts container and the site office just beside the battery banks. The slide here shows the proposed landscaping, which would also secure some biodiversity improvement on the site. So there'd be a proposal for some greening around the verges, and also the planting of some bushes and trees, both to the south near the Coast Guard station, and again between the Coast Guard station, between the power station and the new access. The applicant provided a couple of visualisations, and the first of these is a viewpoint that's taken from Newton Street. Now, because Newton Street has quite a large concrete wall along it, the viewpoint has been taken from the top of the slipway. So in the inset on the drawing to the right there, you can see the position of the tripod of the camera just on top of the slipway with the seawall to the left. And then if you look at the image itself, you can see the position at which the camera was positioned, and the extent of the image, which I'll take you to next. So again, like you can see, like Newton Street and the houses at Seaview Terrace in this image. So the first viewpoint is taken with no development, with us is existing. So this is as the site is at the moment. You can see the 3 chimneys of the power station itself. The Coast Guard building, it's useful to, as a reference point, to look at the height of the ground floor windows in the Coast Guard building. And the next visualisation takes you in where you would see the addition of the blast wall, acoustic wall, and the battery modules. So if I slip back and forward between those, you can see that in terms of visual impact, it's fairly marginal from that view, because coming along Newton Street, the back cloth will largely be the power station. second visualisation is taken on the causeway, just near the hard standing where the car parking for the marina is. And again, this is looking back towards the power station site, power station, and Seaview Terrace. So this is the current view. So as you look towards the site, it's to the left of the Coast Guard station. And you can see the chimneys of the power station in the background there. And on the slightly higher ground, in the background, you can see the houses on Seaview Terrace. And this is the visualization with the acoustic barrier and the modules in place. And if I just flick back and forward between that and that again, you can see that in terms of visual impact, it's fairly limited in the sense that it's going to be about just a little over the height of the ground floor of the Coast Guard station building. So then we've just got a series of photos that have been taken by ourselves on a site visit. So this is a view from just taken outside 27 Newton Street, which is near the junction of Eilean Road, looking towards the power station and the Coast Guard station. And again, the proposed development would sit just in the foreground, in front of the power station and moving towards the Coast Guard station. This is a view just slightly further along the road outside 34 Newton Street. And then again, these are just zoomed in views from the same position. So the modules would sit just on the other side of that ranch fencing, if you like, on the right-hand image. These are the flats at Seaview Terrace, and this is taken just adjacent to the secondary entrance into the Scottish and Southern power station. They have like a kind of yard on the side of the power station where they store, various cable drums and containers associated with, I would imagine, various low voltage works that are carried out throughout the island. In that image, you can see the Coast Guard station just beyond. So the application site is just off the image to the right. And then again, this is like staying at that same point, looking back towards the causeway. And again, like this land is high, Seaview Terrace sits higher than the proposed site. If you go in the main entrance to the power station from the back of Seaview Terrace, and you go into where the gate is sticking into the back of the power station, this is kind of looking onto the back, into the rear of the power station where the chimneys are. And in that same image, looking back towards the site, so you're looking west. There are these two large transformers or substations within the grounds of the substation, and they sit again behind the site where the battery energy storage system is proposed. Again, you can see there's a bit of a level difference here if you look at the difference in height between these and where the blue container is, slightly further in the distance. These are images of the site itself taken from outside the Coast Guard station, and it's just illustrating that there is various bits of, anchors and marine equipment that has been left scattered over parts of the site. And then this is just a further view, just showing more of the site, just rough grassland. You can see that blue container that we referred to in the previous slide, and up above it, further back, are these two brown transformers that form part of the substation, and then the flats at Seaview Terrace over to the left. And then this is just as you kind of come off the causeway, another view towards Seaview Terrace with the site to your right. So there were a number of representation comments received in relation to the application, including some from Stornoway Community Council. Concerns were that the location itself was unsuitable for the nature of the development, that there was a lack of justification on carbon savings and reduction in emissions, concerns regarding fire safety, public and human health, impacts on green space, biodiversity and species, environmental impact, visual impact, economic impact and potential for community wealth building, and various statements over alternative sites that could be used and alternative uses that the proposed site could be put to, and also some concerns over procedural issues. So the key planning issues that have arisen in the assessment of this application relate, first of all, to the character of the actual area. So while some maintain it's residential and the developer that it's more industrial in character, it is actually a fairly mixed character area. In terms of location, it is within the main settlement of Stornoway, within the edge of Stornoway Core. The site itself is unallocated and it is brownfield land where the government encourage developments of this nature to be on brownfield rather than on greenfield sites. There have been concerns raised regarding visual impact. We consider that these are unlikely to be significant, and also noise impacts where, again, having consulted environmental health, these could be managed through conditions with the acoustic barrier that's proposed required to be put in place. Also concerns to do with residential amenity impacts. Probably the main issue is the nature of the development, that it's a battery energy storage system in a location that is close to housing and associated concerns regarding health and safety and fire risk. There is significant national policy support for best technology as part of the need to have energy storage available as we move to more green energy production. It is the case that renewables energy cannot respond to demand in the same way that nuclear or diesel power or coal powered generation stations can, and therefore there has to be a means of being able to better use to store the power for release when there is higher demand. Best storage itself, it's a relatively new but a rapidly expanding type of development across Scotland. The other issue is that there is a lack of clarity over the overall regulatory framework. It is acknowledged, nevertheless, that there is that each battery itself, a containerized battery, is designed to meet international standards and to avoid circumstances where they would lead to potential for fire, for example, by overcharging or overheating. And that's overheating is really protected by the use of ventilation equipment and also measures to protect from mechanical damage and fire spread. In the absence of specific planning guidance related to battery energy storage, we fall back to the guidance in the development plan for the assessment of the application. So, as is the case with all planning applications, they're required to be determined in accordance with the statutory provisions of the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. In this case, a health and safety statement was provided. It's the health and safety statement sets out how it would comply with the guidance available from the National Fire Council. We have proposed a range of conditions, and subject to management by these conditions, our assessment concludes that the proposed development would satisfy most policy requirements, including the settlement strategy, and taken as a whole, it would be acceptable in relation to potential significant effects on the environment. It's concluded that the benefits of the proposed development outweigh the likely harms when significant weight offered by national and local policy to green energy and decarbonisation of the grid is taken into account. It's acknowledged that while best technology may have some health and safety risks, with appropriate design and mitigation, which is proposed by the application, the likelihood of occurrence of these is considered to be low. Recommendations that the development should be approved subject to the conditions that will mitigate the effects and secure finalised details of the layout and management plans prior to the commencement of development. It's also recommended that any consent be granted for 5 years duration, given that the nature of the development is still new and evolving, and it may take longer than 3 years for the development to be ready for implementation. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Can I thank Mrs. Ferguson and Mrs. MacDonald for that report? Open out to members of the board for any questions or comments. Councillor Macaulay.
Thanks again, Chair, and thank you very much again, Morag, for the presentation. During the public consultation, there's 910 there. There is a lot of concerns, whether valid or not. Obviously, I'm not qualified to say, but there is a lot of concern out there regarding fire safety. I don't know if this question can be answered, but I'll give it a go anyway. So probably it was: is the applicant obliged or compelled to get insurance to cover the eventuality of some horrific accident happening? That would be probably part one of my question. Part two is why not, if they aren't? Thank you.
Mrs. Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. I would expect that the cost of the development would mean that any investor would require insurance, but that's not a planning matter. We couldn't secure or ask for that to be provided by condition, but I think it would be unlikely that it would be developed without insurance being in place and meeting the insurer's requirements.
Thanks. That's a bit comforting that an insurance company is actually willing to insure that risk. Then it gives me a bit of comfort that the risk, and they can afford to pay whatever premium that's going to be. Then maybe it's not as high risk as maybe things flying around my head are at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Macaulay. I'd like to go online to Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Morag, for the presentation. I'm kind of thinking along the same lines of this fire risk, and it surprises me there was no response from SFRS when they had the option to respond. Lithium-ion batteries, I think I read, is what they're using, which are have a history of fires and the explosive once these things go up. Do these kind of developments, are they covered by other regulations like the Siar, etc., protection?
Councillor MacLeod, the sound on your microphone was slightly occluded. But from the gist of your question, I think it was relating to fire safety and a non-committal by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to respond as a consultee. Is that correct?
That's the basis of it, yeah.
Mrs. Ferguson.
As I mentioned in the presentation, I mean, there is an absence of guidance at the moment, and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and indeed the Fire and Rescue Services across the country, are not currently statutory consultees in planning applications for battery energy storage. Nevertheless, the National Fire Council, National Fire Chiefs Council, have produced interim guidance, and that is the kind of go-to guidance that is available at the moment. They have earlier this year, they carried out a further consultation on an updated edition of that guidance, which is primarily concerned with how fire services will manage risk and would approach the control of a fire in these instances. The batteries themselves are I should say that an informal request for comment was made on the application to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, but they're not required to respond because they're not a statutory consultee, and they elected not to respond. However, we understand that the developer has been in discussion with the local fire service. The health and safety of each battery unit, each battery unit itself has to be designed to meet health and safety standards to prevent, them overcharging or overheating. But there isn't an overall regulator, if you like, for this nature of development. Although if it's a place of work, they will be bound by the same health and safety at work regulations as every other employer.
Are you happy with that, Councillor MacLeod?
Yeah, I think that kind of answers what I was looking at. Yeah, thanks.
But yes, I would agree with Councillor MacLeod. I think it is rather unusual that the fire rescue service didn't provide an opinion on this application. But as you say, regulations are evolving in this sphere, and they may need to do so at some point in the future. Okay. Any other questions or comments from member of the board? Nope. Oh, Councillor Finney-Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, and thanks, Morag, for that report. And I think it's been pretty, by the looks of it and what I've read, it's been pretty well researched, and I think all the safeguards are there and what we've seen in front of us. And I think for me anyway, as long as all the guidance and that and recommendations are met by the developer, I think it's really we should accept this and go with it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Stewart. No more comments or questions? Very good. Therefore, do members agree to recommend that the Comhairle agree the recommendations at paragraph 3.1 of this report to approve the application subject to the planning conditions and planning obligations set out in Appendix 1 to the report? Do members agree?
Agreed.
Agree.
Agree. Thank you very much. That's a decision at that item. And can I thank you all for your attendance here in the chamber and online. Our next and final meeting of the board for this year will be next Monday, the 9th of December. And until then, can I wish you all a pleasant onward week. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Cheers.
Later this afternoon. Okay.